Picture this. You're scrolling through old photos and find pictures from your high school graduation. The person staring back looks familiar, but also like a stranger. Maybe you were absolutely certain you'd become a doctor. Now you work in marketing. Perhaps you thought you'd marry your high school sweetheart. They're now just a distant memory. Or maybe you see yourself wearing a band t-shirt for music you can't even stand anymore, surrounded by friends you haven't spoken to in years. You might cringe at your old Facebook post full of inspirational quotes and dramatic relationship statuses. I can't believe I posted that, you think. What was I thinking? Yet somehow, embarrassingly, you remember the exact emotions behind those posts. The heartbreak that felt world-ending, the excitement about college acceptance, the righteous anger about some cause you barely remember now. Despite all these changes, your body has literally replaced most of its cells. Your brain has formed new neural pathways. Your entire worldview has shifted. You still feel like the same person. You still get nervous before phone calls, still laugh at the same type of humour, still feel that familiar knot in your stomach when you're anxious. You have the same social security number, the same awkward laugh, and most importantly, the same sense of being you. But then doubt creeps in. When your parents tell embarrassing childhood stories at family dinners, do you feel like they're talking about a completely different person? When you run into someone from high school who remembers you as the quiet one, but you now consider yourself outgoing, which version is real? When you look at your Spotify year in review and realize your music taste has completely transformed, are you still the same person who used to fall asleep to those old playlists? This everyday experience opens one of philosophy's most enduring questions. What makes you the same person over time? This isn't just academic. It affects how you make decisions about relationships. Can you promise to love someone forever if you're constantly changing? Plato argued that your true self is an immortal soul that exists independently of your physical body. According to this view, personal identity consists in the continuity of this immaterial soul, which remains constant despite bodily changes. Think about it. When you say, "I have a body" rather than "I am a body," you're echoing Plato's intuition that the real you is somehow separate from your physical form. This soul-based theory dominated thinking about identity for over 2,000 years. But here's the problem. How do we know souls exist? And if they do, how do they connect to our everyday psychological experiences? These questions led philosophers to look elsewhere for answers. Locke's revolutionary idea, memory makes you. In 1689, John Locke fundamentally changed the conversation. He argued that personal identity doesn't lie in any mysterious soul, but in something we can actually observe: consciousness and memory. According to Locke, you are your memories. What makes you the same person over time is your ability to remember having had past experiences. This resonates powerfully with anyone who's ever felt most themselves when reminiscing. When you remember your first day of college, the nervous excitement, the smell of the dorm hallway, the awkward small talk with your roommate, that memory feels distinctly yours. Same with remembering your first job interview, the panic when your laptop crashed before a final exam, or that moment you realized you were in love. These memories don't just record your past, they feel like they are you. Consider how you introduce yourself to new people. You don't describe your molecular composition or show them your birth certificate. You tell stories. I'm the person who moved here from Ohio. I'm someone who used to be pre-med but switched to English. I'm the one who spent a semester abroad in Spain. Your identity feels inseparable from your accumulated experiences, but Locke's theory faces serious problems that become obvious when you think about your own life. What about experiences you've completely forgotten? You probably can't remember learning to walk, your third birthday party, or most of your sophomore year math classes. Are those experiences still part of you? More troubling, what about things you remember differently than they actually happened? Maybe you remember being braver in that confrontation with your roommate than you actually were, or funnier at that party than others recall. Research shows that every time we remember something, we potentially change it. So if you are your memories, but memories are constantly being altered, what does that say about the stability of your identity? Then there's the brave officer problem that philosopher Thomas Reid pointed out. Imagine you at 25 remember being 18, and you at 18 remembered being 8. But you at 25 have completely forgotten being 8. By Locke's logic, 25-year-old you is the same person as 18-year-old you. And 18-year-old you was the same person as 8-year-old you. But 25-year-old you is not the same person as 8-year-old you. That's logically impossible. This becomes especially relevant in your 20s when so much feels forgettable or half-remembered. Can you clearly recall why you chose your major? What about that person you dated sophomore year? Do you remember their middle name, their favourite movie, what you thought about? If these memories are fading or distorted, are those experiences still part of your identity? The biological answer: you are your body. Some philosophers responded by arguing for biological continuity. You're essentially a human animal, and you persist as long as the same biological life continues, regardless of psychological changes. This handles cases Locke's theory struggles with. You remain you during dreamless sleep, anesthesia, or even severe memory loss. But biological theories face their own puzzle, the brain transplant problem. If your brain could be transplanted into another body, wouldn't you go with your brain rather than stay with your original body? Most people's intuition says yes, suggesting that mere biological continuity isn't enough. Modern synthesis: psychological continuity. Contemporary philosophers have developed more sophisticated approaches that might better match your actual experience. Instead of requiring specific memories, modern psychological theories focus on overlapping chains of psychological connections. Your sense of humour, your values, your way of relating to others, your core personality traits, even your habits and quirks. Think about your development from 18 to now. You might not remember every conversation or decision, but there are unmistakable threads connecting your past and present selves. Maybe you're still the person who gets quiet when overwhelmed, or who always roots for the underdog, or who can't resist helping friends with their problems even when you're swamped. Perhaps you still procrastinate the same way, scrolling through your phone instead of doing the hard thing, still get excited about the same kinds of stories, or still have that habit of overthinking text messages before sending them. These psychological patterns create continuity even through major life changes. When you make a dramatic shift, switching from business to art school, ending a long-term relationship, moving across the country, coming out to your family, you might feel like you're becoming a different person. But psychological continuity theory suggests you're the same person making different choices based on evolving, but connected psychological states. Consider someone who starts college as a shy, anxious pre-med student because their parents are doctors. They struggle in chemistry, discover they love their literature elective, start writing for the campus newspaper, gain confidence, change their major to journalism, and eventually become a travel writer. From the outside, this looks like becoming a completely different person. But look closer. Maybe they were always curious about other people's stories, which drew them to medicine initially, always loved reading, which made literature click, and always felt constrained by others' expectations, which made the journalism path feel liberating. The surface changes hide deeper continuities. This explains why certain songs can instantly transport you back to who you were years ago, or why you fall into familiar patterns when you visit your childhood home. It's also why your friends might say that's so you when you do something that fits your personality, even in a completely new context. There's something recognizably consistent that persists through change. But this raises new questions. How much psychological change is too much? If therapy completely transforms how you handle relationships, or if medication dramatically shifts your mood and energy, are you still the same person? What about those moments when you surprise yourself? When you stand up to someone in a way you never have before, or when you discover you actually enjoy something you thought you hated? Are you becoming someone new, or discovering who you always were? The narrative self, your life as story. Another compelling approach suggests that personal identity consists in the life stories we tell about ourselves. You are the protagonist of your own narrative, constantly creating meaning from your experiences. This will definitely resonate if you've ever had to explain your life choices to skeptical relatives at Thanksgiving dinner. You don't just list random events. You create a coherent story that makes sense of your decisions. I started as a business major because I wanted financial security, but I realized I was miserable. Then I took that creative writing class and remembered how much I loved storytelling. I know teaching doesn't pay much, but I'd rather be broke doing something meaningful than rich doing something that crushes my soul. Or consider dating apps, where you have to compress your entire identity into a few photos and sentences. You're not just listing facts, you're crafting a narrative. Adventure seeker who loves hiking and trying new restaurants, former corporate lawyer turned yoga instructor, dog mum to a rescue pit bull named Pancakes. You're telling a story about who you are and what your life means. The stories we tell shape not just how others see us, but how we see ourselves. When you describe yourself as someone who's been through a lot but stayed positive, or a person who learns from their mistakes, or someone who's still figuring things out, you're not just describing your past, you're creating a framework for understanding your future choices. Think about how you narrate major life changes to yourself. When you quit that job you hated, you might tell yourself, I'm someone who prioritizes happiness over money. When you ended that toxic relationship, the story might be, I finally learned to value myself. When you move back in with your parents after college, it could be, I'm being practical while I figure out my next step, or I'm someone who values family. These narratives don't just describe what happened, they help determine what you do next. Social media has made this narrative aspect of identity even more prominent. Your Instagram isn't just random photos, it's a carefully curated story about your life. Your LinkedIn profile isn't just a resume, it's a professional narrative about your career journey. Even your Spotify playlists tell a story about your evolving taste and mood. But narrative theories have problems too that you've probably experienced firsthand. Our self-stories can be selective, misleading, or just plain wrong. The story you tell on LinkedIn emphasizes strategic career planning. I deliberately chose internships that built complementary skills, while the story you tell your therapist focuses on anxiety and confusion. I had no idea what I was doing and just took whatever opportunities came up. The story you tell your parents emphasizes your stability and success, while the story you tell your best friend includes more struggle and uncertainty. Which version is the real you? And what happens when the stories you tell about yourself don't match the stories others tell about you? Maybe you see yourself as adventurous and spontaneous, but your friends see you as anxious and indecisive. Maybe you think you're the person who learned from past mistakes, but you keep making the same dating choices. There's also the pressure to have a coherent narrative during a period when your life might feel anything but coherent. Job applications and graduate school essays expect you to present a clear story about your goals and motivations, but the reality might be messier. I thought I wanted to live in New York, but I'm lonely and broke. I studied marketing, but I'm not sure I like it. I'm in a relationship, but I don't know if we're right for each other. The gap between the narrative you're expected to have and the uncertainty you're actually experiencing can create its own identity crisis. Derek Parfit's bombshell: identity doesn't matter. In 1984, philosopher Derek Parfit dropped a philosophical bombshell. Through thought experiments about brain transplants and gradual replacement of neurons, he argued that personal identity often has no clear answer, and that this doesn't matter. Parfit concluded that what matters for survival isn't strict identity, but psychological continuity. Whether future psychological states are yours in some metaphysical sense is less important than whether they're connected to your current states in the right way. This might sound abstract, but it's practically liberating. If you're worried about whether you're still yourself after major life changes, Parfit suggests asking instead, are your future psychological states connected to your current ones in ways you care about? Real-world applications when theory meets life. These philosophical debates aren't just academic. They show up in your actual life in surprisingly concrete ways. Legal systems must determine when someone is responsible for past actions. If mental illness dramatically changes someone's psychology, are they still the same person who committed a crime? But you don't need courtroom drama to see how this applies to you. Think about accountability in your own life. Are you responsible for that embarrassing drunk text you sent 2 years ago? What about the promise you made to your ex that you now think was unrealistic? If you've grown and changed since then, how much of your past self's baggage should you carry? Consider student loans, a very real concern for many people in their 20s. You signed those papers when you were 18, probably with very little understanding of what $50,000 in debt would actually mean for your future life. The person who signed those documents might have had completely different career goals, financial understanding, and life priorities than you do now, but legally and practically, you're still responsible for those decisions. Should you be? Medical ethics faces similar questions, and they might affect you directly. If you write healthcare instructions while healthy, but later develop depression that changes your values and risk tolerance, should doctors follow your original directive or respond to your current state of mind? What if you're on medication that significantly changes your personality? Which version of you should make medical decisions? For young adults, these questions arise constantly in everyday relationships. When you're dating someone, are you committing to who they are right now or to who they might become? If your partner was completely different 5 years ago, maybe they were religious and you're both atheists now. Or they used to party constantly and now prefer quiet nights in. Which version did you fall in love with? And which version are you promising to stick with? The rise of wellness culture and self-optimization makes this especially relevant. Therapy, meditation apps, fitness programs, career coaching, life coaches, everything promises to help you become your best self. But at what point does self-improvement become self-replacement? If you do intensive therapy and emerge with completely different relationship patterns, coping strategies, and ways of seeing the world, are you a better version of yourself or a different person entirely? Social media adds another layer of complexity. The you on Instagram might emphasize travel and adventure, while the you on LinkedIn is professional and goal-oriented, and the you on TikTok is funny and irreverent. Your dating app profile shows yet another version. Which one is real? And if you curate these different versions so carefully that they start to feel more authentic than your offline self, what does that say about your identity? Even simple lifestyle changes raise these questions. The person who transforms their life through fitness might feel like they've become completely different, more confident, more disciplined, more social. The person who goes vegan might find that this dietary change shifts their social circle, their political views, and their sense of identity. Are these the same people with different habits, or have they actually become different people? Consider how you handle your digital footprint. Do you cringe at old tweets and Facebook posts? Many people go through their social media history and delete embarrassing content from their younger selves. But in doing so, are you editing your identity or just your public presentation? If you delete evidence of who you used to be, does that make it less you? The neuroscience revolution. Modern brain science is adding new dimensions to ancient questions. We now know that the sense of self involves multiple brain networks that can be independently affected by injury or disease. This suggests personal identity isn't a single, unitary thing, but involves multiple systems. We've also learned that memory is reconstructive. Every time you remember something, you potentially alter it. If identity depends on memory, but memories constantly change, what does this mean for the stability of who you are? Studies of split-brain patients suggest consciousness might not be as unified as we assume. If consciousness can be divided, can personal identity be divided too? Cultural perspectives, the Western bias. Most of what we've discussed reflects Western philosophical traditions emphasizing individual identity. But other cultures offer different perspectives. Buddhism teaches no self, the idea that what we take to be a continuous self is actually a constantly changing collection of processes with no permanent essence. These perspectives suggest that our preoccupation with personal identity might reflect cultural assumptions rather than universal truths. If the sense of continuous identity is partly constructed through cultural beliefs, this has implications for how we understand ourselves across different societies. Living the question. As you navigate your 20s and 30s, you're experiencing firsthand the puzzles philosophers have debated for centuries. When you look at old photos and barely recognize yourself, when you make decisions that surprise even you, when you feel like you're constantly becoming someone new while remaining essentially you, you're living these philosophical questions in real time. Maybe you've had the disorienting experience of running into someone from high school who remembers you completely differently than you remember yourself. They recall you as the serious one, while you remember feeling like the class clown. Or your parents tell stories about your childhood that don't match your memories at all. These moments make you wonder, which version is real? Are we all just unreliable narrators of our own lives? Or consider how jarring it can be when someone brings up something you said or did years ago that you've completely forgotten. Remember when you said you'd never live anywhere but California? What about that time you were obsessed with learning guitar? These reminders of forgotten selves can feel like evidence of other people you used to be. But were they really you, or just phases you went through? The persistence of the personal identity problem might reflect something fundamental about human nature, especially during periods of rapid change. You exist at the intersection of biology and psychology, individual mind and social relationships, past experiences and future aspirations. Your sense of identity draws on all these dimensions, which is why no single theory feels complete. Think about how your sense of self shifts in different contexts. You might feel like a completely different person when you're with your college friends versus your co-workers versus your family. With college friends, you're the person who stayed up all night having deep conversations and made questionable decisions. At work, you're responsible and professional. With family, you might revert to old patterns and feel like you're 16 again. Which context brings out the real you? Or consider how your priorities and values have shifted. Maybe you used to think people who chose career over money were naive, but now you're considering taking a pay cut for a more meaningful job. Maybe you used to judge people who moved back in with their parents, but now you're living at home to save money. Maybe you used to think long-distance relationships never work, but now you're in one. These changes in perspective can make you question whether you ever really knew yourself at all. The smartphone era has added new dimensions to these questions. You probably have thousands of photos and texts that document your life in unprecedented detail. But somehow this record can make identity feel more confusing, not less. You can scroll back through years of photos and see yourself in relationships you'd forgotten about, at places you barely remember visiting, with expressions on your face that look foreign to you now. All this documentation should make your personal history clearer, but often it just highlights how much you've changed and how much you've forgotten. And what about the future? If you're constantly changing, how can you make long-term commitments or plans? Should you choose a career based on who you are now or who you think you might become? If you're not sure who you'll be in 5 years, how can you promise to love someone forever? These aren't just practical questions, they're philosophical ones about the nature of commitment and the continuity of self over time. Practical wisdom for an uncertain self. So what practical guidance emerges from centuries of philosophical debate and your own lived experience of identity confusion? First, expect identity uncertainty, especially in your 20s and early 30s. That feeling of who am I and what am I doing with my life isn't a personal failing, it's a normal part of human development. The complexity and uncertainty you feel isn't something to be solved quickly, it's something to be lived through thoughtfully. When you feel like you're constantly changing, or don't know who you really are, remember that philosophers have been wrestling with these same questions for thousands of years. You're not broken, you're human. Second, recognize that you can change dramatically while maintaining essential continuity. You don't have to choose between being a completely new person or staying exactly the same forever. The thread connecting your past and future selves might be psychological patterns you've always been curious, biological continuity, same brain, evolving, life narrative, the story you tell about growth and learning, or simply the ongoing project of being you. Some thread exists even when it's hard to see. Third, don't get too hung up on whether you're still yourself after major life changes. Instead, ask whether your changes align with your values, contribute to your well-being, and help you build meaningful relationships. If therapy helps you become less anxious, if travel broadens your perspective, if a career change makes you happier, these might be changes worth making regardless of whether they make you a different person. Fourth, embrace multiple selves without losing coherence. You can be professional at work and silly with friends, confident in some areas and insecure in others, extroverted at parties and introverted at home. These aren't signs of inconsistency or fake behavior. They're evidence of your complexity as a human being. The goal isn't to flatten yourself into one-dimensional consistency, but to find meaningful connections between your various aspects. Finally, be patient with your own becoming. Your 20s and 30s are often about exploration and experimentation. It's okay to try different careers, different relationships, different ways of living. It's okay to change your mind about big things. It's okay to not have everything figured out. The pressure to have a clear, stable identity can make normal development feel like failure. Instead, think of identity as an ongoing project rather than a problem to be solved once and for all. Conclusion. The question continues. The question, what makes you you, remains unsolved after millennia of investigation. Perhaps this persistence tells us something important. Human identity is complex enough that no single theory captures its full richness. Your 20s might feel like a period of constant identity crisis, but this is when you're doing some of the most important philosophical work of your life, figuring out not just who you are, but what it means to be a continuous self in a world of constant change. The answers you develop will likely evolve over time, and that's not a bug in the system. It's a feature of being human. In wrestling with the question of personal identity, you're participating in the ongoing human conversation about consciousness, responsibility, growth, and meaning. The philosophical journey matters as much as any destination. In asking what makes me me, you're already engaging with the deepest questions about what it means to be human. And in a strange way, that questioning itself might be part of what makes you uniquely, persistently, undeniably you.